All right, so we're still waiting for Jeff. Jeff was gonna join in transit. So I'm just gonna give him one more minute, 1 or 2 more minutes to join, especially since he did the minutes. But it might be worth just identifying who's doing the minutes next. So Dick, I think it's your turn.
I think
Yeah,
I'm up. Yep.
okay, great.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
You double check. I don't know, Mariah, you did it twice, right? You've done it
Yeah,
twice?
we talked about last week, it was Cliff, but then or wasn't it? Or I don't know, it was someone,
No,
and
it was
then Dick said,
Jeff,
oh, I
and then
wish
it'll
I
be
love
Dick.
trade with you or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Cliff will be next.
Mariah, while we're waiting, did you distribute anything today on
I
the
just emailed out the workload doc. I'm sorry. I thought because I sent it to Sadaf a couple days ago, and Sadaf, I just assumed you like had Nicole post, so I didn't go look.
Sorry about
And
that.
no, it's okay. I
I
should have
didn't
checked
realize it
back
was
with you.
done. Yeah, I
And
also didn't know.
then
Yeah.
and then I just went to look at like what else was being posted, and I realized it wasn't there, so I just emailed it out. And Nicole just posted it online as well.
okay, I confess I hadn't looked or therefore haven't looked at it. So
It's the it'll be easy for us to go through pretty quickly because I made a little
okay,
summary and then there's like backup stuff, but
okay.
yeah.
Okay, Chad said he's going to join in a little bit also. Um, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so Dick is taking notes. We'll do a quick roll call. Dick, we're just doing a roll call.
Okay. Sadaf.
I was going to do the roll call, so I just called your name
Okay,
first.
I
This is an inception
All
roll
right.
call.
Um, Dick's here. Cliff is here, Mariah is here, and now Sid is also here. I'm just gonna,
And you're here.
yes, and I am here, and Jeff is running late. So, hey, Sid. All right. So the next item on the agenda was minutes. Did people get an opportunity to review the minutes from last week?
I did. I just have two little nits. Um, and with all due respect, Sid, I don't know that you're an official member of the subcommittee, and I would be concerned about the designation right at the beginning. Um, and then Sergio's name is misspelled. So in the third or fourth line of the minutes. But other than that, I thought they were terrific.
Okay. All right. Did anybody else have other edits or feedback on the minutes?
And let me just say I have not communicated these to Jeff.
Yeah, so when he joins, we'll let him know. But just for the sake of time, I was going to go ahead and take a vote on the minutes just to keep the meeting going, unless other people have objections. The one piece of feedback that I had, just more of a point of clarification, is around the out-of-district revenue opportunity. Um, I agree it makes sense to continue to pursue. I think there's a question about, and I did watch the recording. Um, I think there's a question that we should just talk about what work this committee does. So I had this on my list of topics to tackle. And given that it is being led by Dr. Schmuckler, we should talk about sort of what we do and do not do within this group versus sort of collaborate with PSB. So that was the only point of feedback. Hey, Jeff. We're talking about the minutes. There were two small pieces of feedback from Dick. Dick, do you mind just recapping those so Jeff can make the edits. Oh, you're on mute, Dick.
Okay. Sid is not a formal member of the subcommittee.
Yes, I wasn't sure about that. So he had shown up on one of the previous minutes as on the committee and on another one is not. So I was
Well,
like,
that's probably appropriate. So
yeah, all right.
ex
I will move
officio.
him to the public. No problem.
And Sergio Modigliani's is SERGIO.
Oh, yes, typo. Thank you.
Okay, and then Sadaf was addressing the out of district issue.
Yeah,
Got it.
which is that I believe, you know, we do want to continue to look at this. I think there's just a question about who does what work. So I think it's okay as it shows up in the minutes right now, but
Okay.
let's, you know, we can talk about it as we talk about timeline and other things later on in this call.
Perfect.
Okay,
Awesome. I made those edits. So
thank you. So any other feedback on the minutes? All right, motion, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Great. All right, all those in favor of approving?
You have to do a roll call.
Oh, I do. Oh,
Yeah.
nice try.
cutting corners. All right, Dick,
Yes.
Cliff,
Yes.
Mariah,
Yes.
Sid,
Yes.
and Jeff.
Yes.
And I watched the meeting recording. I also approve the minutes.
Can I just make one comment? It's a
Sure.
little confusing to everybody because if Sid is voting on minutes but is not a member of the subcommittee, like, which isn't, I would like us to sort of like resolve this one way or the
Yeah.
other, just so it's clear for everybody.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's fair.
If he's not a member of the subcommittee, he doesn't vote, period.
Yeah. But I know that, you know, for example, like Val is in the futures group, and I think votes
Yeah,
on
I would make a motion to have Sid be a formal member of the committee, if I can make that motion. If that's what we need.
Yeah, I mean, he's been participating, and I think he's not a voting member for the overall recommendation, I think in the end, right, which is the distinction, right? Because I think those people have to be appointed by the select board, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so I think that's perhaps the delineation. Does that make sense to people who are far better versed on this topic than I am?
So it also means that you need 4 people for a quorum.
I see. Okay, so I would like to do this. I'd like to understand the implications of that, and we can revisit it next time.
Okay,
Okay,
I withdraw my motion
all right, thank you. So Sid, you don't have to vote on the.
with the utmost admiration for Sid.
I rescind my request to.
Sid will not appear as a vote there. So we're
Okay.
good.
All right, good. All right, so the minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is the school model. So hopefully people had time to take a look at this. We can go ahead and start talking about just to, you know, the goal was to sort of to tee up the objective in the actual document. This is not a comprehensive analysis on revising the school model. Obviously, there's a lot of additional work that needs to be done in order to look at that. So this is really more of a cost-based view at steady state, to say, hey, is this something that we want to look at further, right? So just to ground everybody in this. I thought that was important to reiterate. It is in the document, but I wanted to call that out before we talk about it further. All right, I'll open it up to questions, comments.
I will make a comment. I thought it was a remarkable effort. I would, I guess, as with anything, love to see the data that led to the bottom line conclusions. The one thing that nagged at me a little bit as I was reading it was how you would handle transportation issues within this context, and whether they were or were not. There was an allusion to them, but it wasn't clear that they were factored in monetarily.
Yeah. So the analysis, so I'm happy to send the raw spreadsheet out. I PDF'd the spreadsheet, which was virtually impossible to read because everything's on this big. So I just want to acknowledge that it was probably not easy to consume, but I'm happy to share the original spreadsheet that we used with this group. As far as transportation is concerned, this did not factor in the cost of transportation because there are a lot of variables to that.
Right.
You really need to understand who you would provide transportation for and who you would not provide transportation for. The scenarios 1 through 4 were actually redistributed people in adjacent schools in an effort to minimize transportation using the current enrollment as a baseline. Sid can talk about scenario 5, which is the one that he had done the analysis for. But the theory was that if you say, okay, well, if you're going to use Ridley as a middle school, you would take Ridley and then you would sort of distribute it to Lawrence and to, to adjacent schools. Then you would minimize the transportation costs in theory because you're putting people, you're sort of moving people around to a school that might be within a buffer zone, or you're sort of redistributing populations that might be in a buffer zone or within sort of a rational amount of which is within a rational distance. There is table 2 as well that actually shows that most schools have, a couple schools that are within that 1.5 mile distance, which is the PSB policy threshold. Desi's policy is 2 miles. So that's sort of theoretical without doing a more detailed analysis on how you might redistrict depending on what model you choose. So I don't know, Sid, if you have anything to add to that.
Sure, yeah. The model number 5 it's actually more of a thought experiment, and I think there's a lot of logistical and practical reasons why it may not be so successful, but I figured we should just put it out there. The idea behind model 5 is to say fix the class size at each of the schools, to keep that fixed and then optimize for that. So in other words, you're not making your for each address within Brookline, each address would be associated with a primary school, neighbor school, so to speak, but also an overflow address. So you're not just talking about buffer districts, you're talking about each and every district, each and every address in Brookline has 2 possibilities of school. One that you're probably going to go to, but there's also a chance that you could go to this other school that may be not your neighborhood school. And with that model, the transportation, again, one of the things that I was thinking of is that most schools or most addresses from each of the different schools are not, probably under that 1.5 mile threshold. So there would be, I think you would probably get away with not potentially having to provide transportation, even if, let's say, you might have been at under your current model, you might be at FRR, but then you are sent to, a school that's, 1.5 miles from that, even if you might literally live next door to FRR, if that is what is in the best interest of optimizing for class size. The one exception would be Baker, since that is so far from all the other schools, is that there might be need for busing 10, 15 kids from various other locales to Baker. But again, I haven't thought very much in detail about all the types of all the possibilities and all the logistics from address to school, if it's exactly, it's going to be under 1.5 miles or not. So there might be, much more busing that takes place. But again, this is more so a theoretical thought exercise, but just wanted to plant that out there.
Out of curiosity, how much more flexibility would this model give than the buffer zone model that we have now? Would there be a substantial difference between the flexibility that's permitted, or would there not be?
I think so in the sense, and Siddharth, please, correct me if you have other thoughts, in the sense that the if you look at class sizes currently, there's variability from one school to another. There are
Correct.
some schools that have class section sizes or class sizes that are relatively or like 10, 20, 30% lower than other schools. And to me, that's almost the kind of like an equity issue as argument too, is that why is one school associated with a lower class size than another school that can be associated with a higher class size? So I think again, that's a great question. My thought is that there's there's probably a little bit more flexibility in optimizing for that. But I'd love to hear set off your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I would assume that there is more flexibility. I'm just wondering whether it's a, a really substantial difference. For example, you could have now, and I don't know whether this is the case or not, but you could have a small class at school A and a larger class at school B, even though those kids that are going to school B are within the buffer
Right.
already for school A. So they could theoretically be sent to school A, but I'm not sure that we fine tune the classes in that way at the present time.
Right. And I think the question ends up being like, I think that it gives you a lot of flexibility if you choose to index on class size. So actually, Mariah, I'm interested, you said that we do look at that today. I mean, this model also looks at more of a steady state view, right? So right now the buffer zones are applied to incoming students, right? And then you stay in that class, right? And you have like a mass exodus like you do at Lawrence, right? We live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of international students and people, there's a lot of kids leaving, especially in the younger grades, at the end of the school year. And so class sizes fluctuate. Then it, that is one of the challenges with our current model, which is that we look at it with respect to incoming students, as opposed to sort of redistricting and sort of recasting things or moving kids around at sort of a later date. So there's a question and there's an item in the document as well around like, well, you'd have to think about how you would transition to a different model, what that would look like, because you can't just optimize for the class sizes overnight. There would inevitably have to be some sort of transition to that model. But if we decided that we wanted to save costs by optimizing for class sizes, which in our current model we have less ability to do, then we'd have to look at what are the policy changes that we would make, because we know that obviously the costs are driven by headcount. Mariah, you have your hand raised.
Thanks. So just to clarify, they optimize for class size within, but they do not, for example, redistrict students from one school to the next to optimize in subsequent years for students who are existing students. But like in first grade, let's say, like they've done one crack at the sectioning in kindergarten, and then in first grade, if some students leave and new students come in, they're looking at like, oh well, if we don't add anyone to X school, then we could theoretically reduce the section. But it gets tricky because like they might say like, oh, if we don't add more than 3, we don't have to add a section. But if there's 3 students who show up in the core district for that, then it limits what they can do because they are only pushing people to other districts who are in the buffer zone.
So what this would effectively would be to eliminate, I mean, to capsulize it, it would eliminate the concept of a core district, basically.
Well, eliminate any districts, right? I mean, wasn't that the point of Sid's proposal 5, is that it becomes
Yeah, but if you lived, and I could see why you're getting off the school committee, Mariah. If you live next door to FRR, you could be sent to another school, even if you live next door. Even if you were clearly
that scenario
within the core district.
well, in North Brookline, there's a lot more flexibility than there is in South Brookline, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you see tremendously, I mean, and in general, say Brookline has very large buffer zones, and that's why the 2012 expansion of the buffer zones have been so resilient over the past 15 years is because they essentially, other than that very small core district, the entire town is a buffer zone these days. And most of them are not just a 2-school buffer zone. I mean, like there's just huge swaths that are 3 schools even. So I had a slightly different comment though, and it's more of like a math question. Well, one's a math question and one's a comment, which is, so if I'm looking at like concept 5, and I'm only looking at the summary table because I'm only looking at the summary table because frankly the other tables are too small for me to read.
Oh,
But,
sorry.
like, that's okay. That's okay.
It's a very
But,
big
like,
spreadsheet.
conceptually, if I was going from 6 classrooms open to 99 classrooms open, I would think that we reduced 93 more sections, but then it only has 51 sections reduced. And I'm trying to understand why, like, if we're talking about classrooms and classroom sections in K-8, why those two numbers don't sort of swing in opposition to each other in a 1-for-1 setup.
So this is what this is also noted in the next steps around like the way that the classrooms were listed in some of the data that we got on the building side, and then the sort of the data around 6 classrooms. It just it needed to be reconciled. So that is something we need to go
I see.
and do, and we call that out explicitly. I want to do another turn of that because yes, the
Where
gap
is
was
that? Where in the,
it says it's in the list at the end of like additional analysis that needs to be done, or next steps.
which page is that? Sorry.
Oh, now I have to pull it up and find the page. Hold on.
Oh, it's number 4 of outstanding questions, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So that's helpful to me because I was like, something doesn't make sense. The other thing that was interesting to me is that proposal 5, and I don't mean this harshly, but it'll sound a little harsh. Proposal 5 essentially blows up the Brookline like school model as we know it, right?
Yes.
And yet it only saves $8 million. And I don't mean to diminish $8 million, but $8 million is like 4% of the budget or 5% of the budget. It's a very, for something that would be incredibly disruptive, it doesn't save a lot of money. And I guess I'm wondering why you two think that is.
Why we think that it doesn't save as much money as, or like why it saves not that much money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a quantification of what is, I'll put inefficiencies in quotes, inefficiencies in our current model, right? I don't know that I would expect it to save more or less, but I think that the point that it is meant to illustrate from my perspective is that our current districting 8-school K-8 model drives a certain level of inefficiencies. And with the lever being headcount, this is, the way you might gain efficiencies through that process is by fixing classroom size or increasing classroom size so that you can collapse sections. And this is the sort of inefficiency. And so, maybe it says that, it's only $8 million inefficient, but also I will add that like it doesn't consider administrative staff, it doesn't consider, sort of other things that it doesn't consider. If you have fewer classrooms or if you were to retire certain buildings as a result of that, or whatever you would do to that, there's potentially incremental cost savings that would be evaluated if you were to move to a different model. So this has a more limited view because we only had so much data, right? And it was done, this is something Sid and I did with the data that we have. So this is very much only one view of the costs. And then there's the list of things that it doesn't consider.
But frankly, I would just do one response is this to me is one of the, at least at the K-8, because you're considering K-8 only, right? Like this is like one of the largest costs is in classroom teachers. So again, it was sort of just interesting. And I haven't seen the model, so I don't even know if like there could be assumptions you made, which I'm like, no, it should be a factor of 10 more, or a factor of 10 less. I don't know because I haven't seen it yet. But it was just interesting to me.
You thought it would have been bigger.
Well, I think that there is this general perception that if we could treat children like widgets, we would save a lot of money. And to me, this, again, I haven't seen the model, so I don't know the assumptions yet, but at first blush, it says even when you treat children as widgets, you don't save that much money relatively. Which I thought
Well,
is interesting. It's an interesting first pass at it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's my
I mean, you
interpretation.
don't save that much money on classroom teachers. Which
Right.
is not to say that you couldn't save more money if you were to structure things differently. I just want to be clear on what I think the analysis actually says. But you're right, it's $8 million worth of headcount savings.
but I mean, one of the things that this analysis doesn't do is actually to look at what are the fixed costs associated with running the school system as it's currently quote unquote designed, K-8, with all the schools. What are the costs that changing class sizes can't affect? So like special education costs.
Yep.
So when you start looking at the savings relative to those expenses that you actually can maybe, control is not the right word, but impact, I think that's a better way, a better denominator to be thinking about relative to the savings. And this doesn't really point that out.
But I think that there's a couple of other things there. One, which you're accurately pointing out, which is that there's a whole bunch of things that I won't call them fixed costs, but I'll say they aren't influenced by this thing, at least positively, right? Or savings. They don't accrue as savings. But also this didn't take into account transportation, which we would presume net some savings out. And the risk of an over large classroom not allowing for example, tier 1 interventions, general education interventions, thus minimizing our special education costs, right? So like when we maximize the classroom size, do we end up again, offsetting some of the savings with increased special education costs?
I guess very possibly, but
Right.
But the question is, how much more analysis would be anticipated to do in any of these scenarios to actually begin to drill down into that sort of level of detail?
Well, one would need to sort of look at the peer-reviewed research and see what they've done and sort of like, trade-offs when they look at like population level data.
I'd also be interested to understand the experience of anyone in Massachusetts, so certainly in our close by neighbors who've made changes, if there are any, and what the impact has been or not been relative to what they anticipate. I think that's something else we should be ultimately.
Cambridge shuffles between middle school model and K-8 model, shuffled between K-8 model and middle school model 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was longer. It was maybe like
Was it 10 or 15 years ago?
Yeah, it was like 10 or 15 years. The other there was a town, I think it was Franklin, I want to say. It's one of those places out west. That or west, south. Where they actually they had a failed override. We can look this up, and they actually did some collapsing and closing of a particular school and actually did a bunch of shuffling around, and that was in direct response to some financial, to an override issue, a failed override. So that might be an interesting one as well. They did that because for budgetary reasons. I'm not sure why Cambridge made that decision. I don't know, Mariah, if you're aware of it or not. They also, in parallel, when they made those changes, they actually did a bunch of building renovations. So then they built, their middle schools that were sort of fit for purpose, for lack of a better term, and that happened, on a similar timeline. And that was sort of shortly before I moved there. It was about 15 years ago.
I don't remember why they chose to move from K-8 to a middle school model. And I think they haven't done it universally either. There's a
They
couple of
haven't.
build-out
They kept
schools.
it for their specialized programs.
Yeah.
So the Spanish immersion, the Montessori are the two that I'm aware of.
I will add, it doesn't necessarily have to be Massachusetts. It could be other states.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And Sid, I think you had actually found a different community, done something similar, right?
That's right. I can try to pull up the link.
Yeah, that'd be great. That might be worth sharing.
Anyway, it's really interesting as as a thought exercise and a model to sort of see what assumptions or what things people think would happen and which things don't. It's very interesting. So thank you for running it.
Other questions?
One question, just back on the sort of buffer zone. Do we, I know Mariah just mentioned that it sounds like the last time we changed it was 2012, and we kind of made it big enough to fit most things, and hence why we haven't changed it. Is that, I realize chasing the buffer zones is tricky, because then you're playing the game of trying to essentially carve out the space that you think will have all the kids that go to the school that's in the middle of the space, which if the kids move around or the population changes across the town, then suddenly you're out of luck, and which is why you have the overlapping buffer zones so that you can then shift the kids from A to B. But did you guys come across or think about any of that when you were doing this, as far as like if we were to adjust the buffer zones in any way, if it would do some of what we're talking about doing in the model, just sort of quote unquote naturally without changing to a middle school model? I, for the record, think this is really interesting. I like the idea of doing the research and trying to come up with like this kind of quasi number 5 is the baseline of like perfect flexibility of being able to move everyone everywhere whenever we want, down to like, some of the different models. But I'm also just thinking of what Mariah said earlier from a pragmatic standpoint. Yes, it's awesome to do the academic research, but if this is something like we could never change, then it's purely academic. Did you think about any of the buffer zone, like current buffer zones, or look at that? I didn't see a lot of that in here, but I figured I might just ask to save myself the thinking. So.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't think about it explicitly in the context of the buffer zone, so I did scenarios 1 through 4. I think Sid, your scenario 5 is a little bit more aligned with like what would it look like if you were to recast? I mean, essentially districting, right?
Yeah.
Which could be manifested in part through buffer zones, and I think that would be a slightly different view, but more similar to scenario 5, which is really, a primary district and a secondary district, which you could do if you basically said the whole town is a buffer zone, right?
Right.
Which then means you just don't have the core district. So that is another way of reframing the sort of base district and overflow district idea that's in scenario 5. I don't know, Sid.
I think it's scenario 5. If we had potentially had access to more granular data about I guess it was hard to I hear what you're saying. Yes, it was hard to conceptualize that without metrics about where the students clustering, where the students living, how can
Right.
you take this student and go there. It would be completely just made up arbitrarily unless there's
Yeah,
actual
that's
data about each of the individual students to actually do that
right.
estimation.
Yeah, some anonymized version of this is where
Or yeah, some
everyone lives.
anonymized version, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I didn't think about that. So.
And then I will say, just to go back to the comment earlier, so actually the Alexandria City Public Schools in Virginia did a pre alternative analysis of several different models. It's a 123-page document. I can't post a link in the chat, but maybe I can email
Okay,
you
that'd be
to
great.
get us some.
Great.
And then we can have
Thank you.
it posted. Thank you. Okay.
So where does this go from here?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I've been thinking about what the punchline here is. So for me, what's been interesting is that in prior conversations, some of the feedback that we've gotten is, look, you're looking at these cost savings opportunities, but the reality is that salaries are 85% of the budget, which is true, right? And the driver of that will be classrooms and sections for sort of the core teaching staff. And this is one way to think about, class size is one way to think about whether this is a place where the district would want to pursue cost savings opportunities if that's something to evaluate. So I think and then there's a question about whether you would do that through a middle school model or through redistricting, or whether, if we were to pursue it or not pursue it. But I see it as that, this is what we think the high level sizing is on the cost savings opportunity, in different slicing the distribution of students in different ways. And I think that the discussion for this group is based on what we've seen, is this group interested in pursuing this further? Right? There's a lot that is missing from this analysis. Obviously, we don't have all the data. It was not our intention to weigh in on, whether this is beneficial educationally, from an education perspective or not. That's not our area of expertise. And that is one component. There's the component around buffer zones and whether there is an opportunity to do further optimization there, or whether there is a desire to look at the middle school model for a lot of different reasons, but possibly from an efficiency standpoint as well. So
Also the consideration of, I mean, we know what a busing model does, or I'll say a non-neighborhood school model does, and we can look at the comparison on one side of VFW Parkway to the other in terms of property values, and do people, like, is that what people want to do in terms of a school model that, like, is this committee interested in setting up, in proposing? I presume you wouldn't do the model unless you thought there was something there to propose.
So my proposal, well, I'm opening it up for discussion, but my suggestion, what I'm interested in doing is actually taking another step and doing a more detailed analysis, but it would need to be done in conjunction with the schools, right? Our analysis is by definition, by the data, given the data that we had, going to have a limited scope of what we were and were not able to do. But I think it is worth evaluating further.
Would you, Sadaf and Sid, would you pare down your list based on what you know at this point, to eliminate, there's the 3 middle school model, the 2 middle school model, the model 5. We've talked about, other than going all the way to model 5, doing something with buffer zones that came up in discussion today. Do you think, and this would also be a question, I think, for the school committee, if they would be adamantly opposed to a middle school model, it doesn't make sense to do it. But
I can't speak on behalf of the committee, obviously. I would expect, though, that there is interest in the analysis and simultaneous concern about the capacity of staff to take that on in the near term.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, I think, and I know that consultants is sometimes a bad word, but I'm going to use this. To do a proper study on this, it's an involved undertaking. Just, and asking around and seeing, the whatever 123 page report that was generated in Alexandria, Virginia. One option is to take the time to do a more detailed analysis and hire an educational consultant to look at this and see whether there is an opportunity for a more efficient cost structure in a different model, because it's just more granular, right? Looking at the actual space, who fits in what classroom in which building, right? It's just more, ours is more back of the envelope, again, by design. And then also taking a look at what the potential academic benefits are of a middle school model, which is a conversation that I hear from a lot of people, a lot of parents who have children in the middle school program within Brookline. There's, I think, mixed experiences. I know a lot of parents who pull their children out for middle school and then send them to BHS, right? So there's some level of concern, I think, around whether kids continue to be challenged in our existing middle school model or whether there's sufficient differentiation in our current middle school model. And that is something that you would obviously need a level of expertise to look at as well. So that could be undertaken by a consultant, for example, given how stretched the existing staff is. I also think that if we believe the analysis that we've done, right, there's definitely some amount of cost savings through redistributing students. And I think if we were to pursue a more detailed analysis over time, this could be part of the discussion that we have in the context of the work that this group does, which is, look, we think that there are some longer term cost savings opportunities while also having a net academic benefit to the students in this town. And this is something that maybe PSB pursues, over the next 3 years, and then comes up with a recommendation for what may or may not make sense to pursue longer term. So that's my thought on this. As far as, I know Cliff, you have your hand raised, and Mariah as well. As far as narrowing down the options, I mean, I feel like the 3 middle school model doesn't work quite as well. It's messy as it's structured. I think the 2 middle school options are very interesting, and the class sizes, you could sort of structure those so that they're smaller for the younger grades and get bigger, and get some of that cost savings. So I think the 2 middle school option is interesting. You could look at the hybrid option, and then you could look at the non-neighborhood model. That's what I would do. I'd probably eliminate the first one.
Okay.
Cliff?
I was just going to say that this whole analysis and idea, it's not going to happen in the next 3 years. Okay, so we've talked about this being something that maybe starts here because we're all here, but actually belongs as something to include in the futures area.
Yep.
Which obviously deals with the staffing issues that exist today, but also puts this sort of on track if we can get people interested and engaged. And it's a recommendation from the group. And if there really is a willingness on the part of the school committee to evaluate something like this, which I think there's so many things that make sense, if for nothing else, just to be able to tell people we did it, we looked at it, here are the pluses, here are the minuses, here are the costs in order to get someplace, and here are the savings that might be achieved. And you then can have a community discussion. Whereas otherwise it's sort of like people just shut things down without really engaging the community. And I think that that's something that we should try to move away from.
That makes sense. Mariah?
I agree with Cliff. And of course, it's hard for this, obviously, this current committee, this current school committee, this current administration can't bind the actions of a future one. So it's challenging to be able to say, of course, we're going to do this. But I do think that of course, there's the financial things that you've brought up, but there's a lot of other things that we've talked about that are valuable in a middle school model, like the ability to offer much more differentiation, the ability to offer things like, I'll say, richer after-school activities, richer in-school offerings that allow for students to pursue the things that they're most interested in, that are possible when you have many more middle school students present in one location than what is the reality of most, if not all, of our middle schools. So it's not like it has to be taken on a cold, financial calculation of whether or not it's good or not. There's a lot to be said for the model itself, independent of the cost structure. And of course, there's plenty to be said positively for K-8 too. But I think that historically in Brookline, there's been a little bit of this sort of like veneration of K-8 and somehow this like demonization of a middle school. And I think that these days people are thinking about it perhaps a little more subtly, rather than just one is good and one is bad. But I appreciate a lot what Cliff said about putting it in the future section, because we have to be realistic that it's not something, even if we were to start work on it, even if staff were to start work on it tomorrow, it would take years to actually roll out. It's not something that's going to
Totally.
be ready, at least
Yeah.
not done well, not done the way we would all want it to be done well and well thought out, for the next several year cycle.
Right. And just to be clear, no one in this virtual room believes this is happening in the next 3 years. And this was on the futures list, and it only got added here because I'm chairing this committee and I was responsible for it. And this streamlines my meeting.
But to the extent that Franklin or whatever community you was sort of said, like you said they pulled it out, basically, you didn't say these words, but pulled it out of the hat because they had to in response to a failed override. I think that might maybe put the glimmer of possibility in people's eyes. I believe that Franklin is a much smaller community for what it's worth. It
Yeah,
has
I
a
think
handful of
Yeah.
schools. So the complexity of the problem is certainly much smaller in scope.
Yeah.
If nothing else to say about it.
Dick, you had your hand raised, but you
Yeah,
know.
well, I put it down because I remembered I was taking the notes.
Okay.
If I could add just one comment about the last model, while I again, it was a complete thought experiment. It did highlight just some discrepancies in like class sizes. Like in some years, Runkle has a class size of 15 versus Hayes has a class size of 22. It's a difference of, 33%, right? And so if there can be some micro optimizations that take place on a, maybe some of these buffer districts where, let's do a little bit more fine tuning of that, shaving a little bit here and there. Maybe you save a section or two as a short term. It's not going to fix any budgetary issues, but maybe it starts to lay the foundation of thinking along those lines.
Are you talking about like mid career shaving of, like, for example, you were in kindergarten at Runkle and now we're asking you to move over to Hayes so we can get rid of a
No,
section?
no,
Or what do
even
you
just like
mean?
I guess what I'm talking about is that where maybe more aggressive use of existing buffer zones and looking at where versus giving people their priority for their neighborhood school, but or their preference, then being more likely to not view that preference and more likely to maybe actually this is already taking place. So maybe I'll withdraw that because I probably don't know what I'm talking about. So I'll withdraw that comment. But yeah. How about that?
Okay, I would say it is taking place.
Yeah.
Yes. Of course, it gets more challenging. For example, like you might see the 1522. Again, those are both really small schools, so it's really hard to sort of tune because at that point you're going from 2 sections to 1, which is like
Right.
right. And furthermore, some of it may be things like siblings creating lumpy classes like later on, right? Because you wouldn't necessarily you would send a sibling to the same school as their
Right.
older sibling. I
Right.
don't know for sure. I'm just saying that like this is something that they are really, really working on all the time.
Yeah.
And it gets really hard, as Sadaf mentioned, it's really hard at Lawrence because of the churn. Right, which you can see 20% of a class leave, and then all of a
Right.
sudden you end up with a class that was 19 last year and is 15 this year. And
Right.
if we don't have the next batch of kids coming in to fill it, all of a sudden you end up with a classroom of 15 that seemed very well balanced before. So it's a
Right.
struggle. It's a genuine struggle.
Do other schools see something similar? I imagine Pierce probably see something similar, or maybe Ridley, maybe
All of North, I think every school except Heath has an incredibly high churn. The district, the DESI data actually shows it.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can drill down by school, but Brookline has a tremendous churn data or churn rate compared to peer districts.
Interesting.
Yeah, like at least pre-COVID, it was like 1 out of 5 students is new every year.
And so one other question around buffer districts, Mariah, and siblings, is that always a paradigm? Like I've heard of families who have split, right, kids in different schools. Is that
There could be reasons for that.
okay? So that it
Like
tends to
one
be
kid is attending a specialized program or
I see.
something like that.
So that happens when there's a reason versus like the normal scenarios that your siblings will typically go to the same school.
Some siblings don't want to be at the same school.
There's reasons for it, but
It's
I would
true.
say in general, like siblings attend at the school, and that is considered to be a reasonable
Yeah,
justification for
totally
attending the
reasonable.
same school.
I was curious how often the alternative happens because I feel like I hear about it, but I don't have an understanding of how substantial that population is or is not, or what.
Well, I'll give my family as an example. My two oldest attended Pierce,
Mhm.
and my third, we were originally in Pierce Lincoln Buffer. I requested Pierce, we got Pierce. And then with my third, we were in Pierce Lawrence, and I requested Lawrence and got Lawrence for her. And that was just like the way it shook out. And we didn't go to Pierce because it made sense for our family for her to go to Lawrence for multiple reasons.
Got it.
Yeah, so it happens.
Yeah, not to jump over Dick real quick, but this is a little bit of what my question earlier was it would be really interesting to see what that spread is, right? In my mind, you go to the school right where you live, but we know over time with the bigger buffer zones and with people being able to request, we have a bigger spread. Has that bigger spread led to what we're looking at? And if we were to reduce that spread, and maybe not like, hey, everyone's redistricting this year, but anyone starting or is not a sibling or whatever rules we come up with, over time we can get it back to where it's tighter. That's what the sort of what I was trying to get at earlier, not really asking in the right way. But I'm very curious to know what that looks like, simply because we all know that changing anything in this town is really, really hard. Even when we said we're going to take the first graders and second graders at Pierce before COVID and put them at Mamo because Pierce was overflowing, everybody lost their minds. Like, oh my God, you're going to put my kids at Mamo? It's like, guys, it's like not that far away, and Pierce is really full. And ultimately, we didn't do that, right? We used Mamo for other stuff. So, and that was one school within the same neighborhood. So anyway, I would be curious to know what the current spread looks like in relation to some of these other options, which again it's all very interesting. I absolutely think we should include something in our report along these lines. Sorry.
No, thank you. I would wonder whether in some respects churn might make things easier in the sense that, yes, you'd have people leaving, but you'd also have students coming in. If the entire population is turning over on both sides, you'd have more kids coming in that would not have a commitment to a particular school and could be assigned to a different school. So
it doesn't work exactly like that, though. Like, I'll give an example that for the Japanese community, at least, they tend to come and bring their kids in grades, like I'll say the earlier grades, but once you get to about fifth grade, they do not bring their kids at the same level. And so K through 2 or 3 spots that might have been filled in those classrooms aren't necessarily replaced with incoming Japanese students to take their spot in fourth grades and above. And so while as a district, we might have 20% churn, unfortunately, it doesn't neatly array itself across each grade band equally.
All right. Other comments or questions on the analysis? Because I'd love to talk about recommendation and sort of what we agree on as potential next steps. Okay. So there were some questions in the document, and I'd like to talk about those. So there were some outstanding questions, and I think some of these, so I'm on page 5 in the document, in the Word document. Specialized space needs for special ed programs. I mean, this is something that would be, I think, part of a follow-up analysis that would require either participation of of the PSB staff, or if, if we were to take this up with the consultant, whatever gets pursued. Do we think it's worth looking at comparable community class sizes, or is this something, Mariah, that PSB tracks at all?
I don't know if PSB tracks it. I did an analysis a couple years ago of the teacher ratios, which you alluded to also are available on the DESI site. I'd be happy to share that. We
That'd be
come
great.
very squarely in the middle of those numbers, at least a couple years ago when I did this. But I don't know that we have any source for that data, as you also alluded to.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Let's take a look at that. All right, so I mentioned what Dart has in number 3. Open classroom numbers need to be reconciled. So that's something that Sid, you and I can take to just sort of take another look at that in our next rev of the analysis. So number 5, we've talked about this a little bit. So this is framed as redistricting model. This is what was modeled out in scenario 5, but there's sort of a question about buffer zones. Is there something for this group to pursue here? I mean, again, that would require us to work more closely with PSB admin. Obviously, they're understaffed. What are the group's thoughts on how much we should pursue this at this stage? Taking a
Well,
look.
if realistically, you need more information from PSB, and if PSB doesn't have the bandwidth to provide it,
Yeah,
Well-
what can you do? I mean, perhaps we package this differently to say, hey, we think this is worth looking at, right? As one of our
Yeah.
recommendations instead. And then, so similarly, number 6, this is more of a, possible recommendation, or just, something for PSB to consider, that there might be more opportunity for efficiencies with additional classroom consolidation across the district, which is tied to number 5.
So
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so Mariah, not to put you on the spot, but what would this look like if we were to say, hey, we're going to recommend that PSB look at this model, because let's just pick one, like that we have Driscoll becomes a middle school. Like, what would the nuts and bolts be of that process? Was that like a subcommittee forms in school committee? Is that something within the superintendent's office that then they ask for inputs? Like, how would that actually happen?
If I were going to recommend that to school committee, I would probably provide a lot of, rather than trying to be very specific about like, you should create a subcommittee to see about the feasibility of
Yeah,
this middle school. I would probably be more vague, and allow for possibility, because that would allow for possibility to, e.g., do what Sadaf said, which is hire a consultant or
Right,
set up
right.
this. Like, I guess, yeah, I would not try and be too prescriptive as to the form in which it were to be explored.
Okay. But you feel like it would be more of a people would come, either this committee or people, the public, whomever would start at school committee with this proposal, as opposed to like, you wouldn't go straight to Bella and try to do that at that level. I'm just not sure. We haven't really ever had something of this magnitude since I've been around. So I'm just not even sure where it would start.
Well, this reminds me in a lot of ways of BFAC, where you had big ideas, but it required someone to actually follow up and flog them afterwards. It couldn't be a one and done.
Right.
So, to the extent that ERSC is not dissolved this year, but continues to follow up on some of these things, that to me, and then subsequently asks for sort of, just like BFAC did, which I think was the right way to do it, even if maybe BFAC didn't show the results you would have wanted to. I think the right
Yep.
way to do it was to have it be followed up on over multiple time points to ask what progress had been made. So I don't know if Chaz is planning on dissolving this, but to me, it was set up not to be override specific, and in many ways
Right.
it should live beyond an override to prove that point.
Right. Chaz?
Yes, thanks. I'm so glad you mentioned BFAC, Mariah, because I was going to. Yes, I think that's the right model, which is, there is the proposal and then the follow-up. And I think, BFAC, and the other thing that I think is important to think about here is that BFAC made 20 plus recommendations, some of which were, great from our perspective, from a staff perspective, things that we wanted to do, things that we were really happy that BFAC provided the political impetus to move forward on. And then there were some things that were a little further afield where we sort of felt like there wasn't quite the connection between what we do on a day-to-day basis and what the recommendation was. And I think the problem with with that process was that no one ever told BFAC that. There was no dialogue there. And I think that's the big difference that I hope we have in this environment, is that there is that dialogue where we're able to provide feedback and be helpful in terms of saying, we can do this, we can't do that, and here's why. So I don't think it's, I think just because you can't do this in the next 3 years, that doesn't mean that this isn't a really valuable exercise. But it does require the political buy-in of the school committee and then the operational buy-in from the superintendent. So Jeff, to answer your question, it's kind of a both and situation.
Okay.
And Chaz,
Thank
just
you.
so I understand, I mean, my understanding was that the expenditures and revenues study committee was not intended to sort of live on beyond the May election. Is that what was the plan? Maybe I'm misunderstanding what
That was the original intent. And I think most people joined this committee with that understanding. But I also think there is value with the recommendations that extend beyond the May election, for there to be some sort of official follow-up. And I hope that that's one of the things that the full committee discusses, which is what do we want to do to build the accountability for these things that stretch beyond May?
Right. Right. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
So just to keep talking about BFAC for a minute. One of the things about BFAC in the report was that each recommendation came with a suggestion as to who would be responsible, who was responsible for actually implementing something, and whether it was the select board, or was the school committee, or was both select board and school committee, or town meeting, and whatever. And there were certainly things that BFAC recommended where it was always a question as to whether or not there'd be the political will on the part of the executive branch to want to undertake something, and whether or not town meeting would embrace certain things or advisory, whatever. I mean, there were always things that we were not sure would actually be, take place. But with a report like that and like this, you don't predetermine those things because people change, situations change. You put together your recommendations, you outline who would be responsible for doing it. We had both the school committee and the select board endorse. I know the school committee did. They endorsed, I think, almost every single recommendation that BFAC came up with. I'm not sure if the select board did it quite the same way. I know advisory did it for almost everything, but not everything. But you get that political buy-in, and then you have assignments as to who's going to carry things out, and then you go back and check to see whether or not progress is made. But if you don't have an outline as to, well, who should be doing it, and you don't have acceptance by the bodies that you're presenting the information to, then you really can't go back and say, well, what are you doing? Because they're just going to say, well, we never said we do anything.
Right. Okay.
I will, just to add on to this, the BFAC model, I can't speak to select board or advisory because I wasn't a member of those at the time that we were being asked to report. But from the school committee side, David was chair and I was finance chair. And we took our reporting very seriously, and we like looked at what we really, there was a whole gradation of like, we agree with this and we'll do it. We agree with this, but we can't, like, there was a whole system that David Pollock had set up. And we took it very seriously, and it was an opportunity to go back and sort of make sure we were living up to the things that we not only thought were a good idea, but planned to do. And the other thing I would just would add on is that this is just in response to whether or not this committee lives on. A committee lives and its membership can change. So people don't need to feel like they're chained to ERSC forever, even if they were on season 1 of it.
You make it sound like a reality TV show.
I'm on the school committee and I'm telling you.
Which makes me wonder if I get like sponsorship deals or some other.
When people say I watched you on TV last night, it can feel like reality TV.
Yeah, I bet. All right. All right, great. So going back to the document that on page 6, there are topics for discussion. And we touched on some of these, but I just want to make sure that we get to these specific questions. We talked about some of the components that would be follow-ups, right? Looking at the classroom piece. There are acknowledged gaps in the analysis that were upfront in this document. Are there other scenarios we should be looking at, or is there other things that are missing that we should consider further, again, given the data that we have access to right now? I want to open that up to the group and just make sure we think about it before we go back and take another look at this.
I think you have plenty of scenarios that play out here. I can't think of anything extra that you would add in here with the frame of mind of what we were just talking about, where this, in my thinking, this is more of a, hey, the subcommittee put together some data. We have some interesting results. And again, this is assuming that we agree to this, which we haven't agreed to this, but there's significant cost savings that in some of these models that we think warrant a more detailed study by the school committee and the PSB going forward, and I think if we had one scenario, then it might be tougher to say that, but with the scenarios you have, I don't think having 10 scenarios is going to flip somebody to be like, well, yeah, I think as long as we agree that it's a significant, if the proverbial juice is worth the squeeze, if all of this netted us, savings of $250,000, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But, if it's 3 million, 4 million, 8 million, and it crosses that threshold, then, hey, this is something that we should have a set of people looking at in more detail over the next XYZ years. So I wouldn't add anything else to this personally.
Okay.
The only thing I would add is we have alluded to with respect to Model 5, that being sort of the extreme model of no districts, no buffers. I don't know whether you take a look at the question of whether there are adjustments in the buffer zones that would make sense, and whether that would require some granular data that you don't have.
Yeah, I think so. Initially, that's what I was initially thinking of doing as the less extreme. I think I was struggling with how to get access to publicly available data to make that calculation.
But that could be a to-do, something to put on a to-do list.
Yeah.
During the ninth school conversation, Dennis Dowdy, who I imagine you all know, but just in case, is the chair of advisory, Did get data on census tracts, and buffer zone overlays, and something else from, I think, the town somewhere that let him create a tool you could use to actually create like school locations, and it was very fun to play with as you then got to like decide who went where. And I don't know to what extent that type of data is available these days. But at least in the past, you might, if you were interested in that, talk with Dennis about how he made that and where he got his data from.
Okay. Yeah, I
That
can.
was many years ago now, like 10, 8, but yes, it existed.
Okay, sounds good. I think Dennis is an engineer. We'll just ask him to.
Just update it.
I'm
Just
sure
okay.
he has the code somewhere.
I'm
It's
sure
just
he does.
what's the base data that he was working with? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other feedback or sort of comments on the follow-up questions? I mean, I think we touched on sort of 3 and 4 as well. You know, we're missing a lot of data. And we talked about the recommendation, but I agree, Jeff, with your summary, which is where my head was as well. Like, I think it warrants a closer look.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
All right. Okay, if there is nothing else, then I will hand it over to Mariah to talk about teaching loads.
Sure. Do you all have the document, or do you want me to pull it up on the screen?
Would be great if you could put it up.
Sure. One moment, please.
I'm gonna just jump downstairs and grab some food and come back up. Sorry, I'm starving.
Let's see if this works right. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is the high school teacher workload summary by comparable district. So if you all recall, I had reached out to the Mass Association of School Committees. They directed me to DESI. I didn't get a response. So this was about the conversation we had early on about the 4+1 practice, which is not in our contract. And that's where teachers teach 4 subjects in their direct area of instruction, and then they have a 5th, so that's the +1 academic duty. And some of the things that it includes are tutorial. These are very common ones: tutorial, advisory. There's some other programs that they support, but those are very common ones. And so again, the question was, is this a common level of workload? And so after Dick shared some contracts, I went and pulled the rest of them that we were missing from our comparable districts, which are the DESI DART comparable districts that we have. And I used Claude to help me because there's like hundreds and hundreds of pages, and I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. So I asked Claude to go through and look at the contracts. And then I went and I reread everything as well, to make sure that the quotes that Claude generated were actually real, and where they said they were. And spoiler alert, some of them weren't real and some of them weren't where Claude said they were. Just so we all know that AI continues to be a flawed reference tool. And basically the punchline is that of the comparable districts, all of them except for Watertown have a similar contractual cap. And that cap is either number of courses taught, number of students taught. Sometimes they talk about number of students in the classroom. Sometimes they talk about total number of students, but essentially they all align in a, I'll say, a sort of a general sense of around 4 or 5 courses. Sometimes that's per year, which is our 4+1 model. Sometimes that's per day. And Cambridge is a little bit differently. They talk about it at 75% of the day, which is similar, though they're doing the math a little bit differently. Watertown is the only one which was, they talk about teaching 6 of the 7 periods per day. So that's the only one that's out of line of the comparable districts that were specified from DESE. So I went through and this document, which again is posted online and you all got in your email as well. I provided the link. This link here is actually to the contracts page that they live on, and then you can just find the relevant educators link, and it's going to be there. Typically it's Unit A or whatever. And these are like validated quotes from all of them. So you can see like Acton Boxborough has 4 single teaching periods plus 1 duty per day. For English teachers, everyone else is 5. Desirable maximum number of students per teacher is as follows, and they have 25. That's per class. This was in the class size section, so I included that. Arlington, similar classes other than English, 125. English classes 100. They talk about 4 periods per day. Belmont, 125 for the major academic areas, 125 students per teacher. Cambridge, as I said, they talk about 75% of instructional day. Class size, they say as soon as the maximum number of teachers, of pupils per teacher will be, and they have 28 for academic subjects. Lexington, teaching load is 125 students per 1 teacher. English is the exception, which is 100 students per 1 teacher. And so on and so forth. I mean, they're all relatively similar. You can look at the wording. And I'm just looking to see if there's anything else I want to know. Oh, the one last thing I want to note is Brookline's practice, as I mentioned at the beginning, is not in our contract. And these other districts, I was using contracts to compare. So if other districts were trying to look at us, they wouldn't see this wording in our contract. And I just want to like highlight that it's that we are unlike our peers and that it's not a contractual obligation. Any questions on this?
So I'm sorry, what piece is not a contractual obligation?
We don't have any sort of staffing portion on our, we don't have anything requiring 4+1, all these other places, it's actually in their contract, and ours, it is not contractual. It is a practice.
Got it. Okay.
Is there anything in our contract that talks about the number of students? So many of
There
these.
is something in our contract that talks about the number of students, and I can't remember what it says. I'd have to go pull it up really quickly and take a look at it.
It's an interesting piece of information.
Yes. Any other questions?
No, I mean, I think the core question that was raised when we kicked off the subcommittee was, is there, is this consistent with other districts, and is there an opportunity for this to be evolved, as the schools look at future contracts or other efficiencies? And it seems like this is squarely consistent with other.
Well, it's, yeah,
right?
one difference, though, it does seem, just looking at it, that in most of the other districts, the teachers are expected to teach 5 classes, which.
No, that there's certainly multiple of them that are
4+1.
4+1s.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, I just in a quick look, but okay, we can obviously dig into it a little bit.
Or they might teach 5 classes, but they're limited as to how many students they have to teach.
Right.
That gets
Right.
to a different calculation.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you're 25 a class and that's your functional limit or your target limit,
I found the language in our contract about student load. So it's the goal of the school committee that no full-time high school teachers in social studies, math, or foreign language shall have an aggregate student load of more than 115 students. If on November 1st, such a teacher has a student load in excess of 115, the head of school shall make efforts to reduce such load to 115. So it's not
It's not for a class, but it's 115.
115. total.
which is the lowest number of any.
That's
Right, but it's
that's
also
actually the
not
most interesting
binding.
finding, and
Right, the other ones that's binding, it's non-binding.
Okay.
so 4+1 is non-binding. 115 is also sounds like it's non-binding, right? Like
115 is contractual, but it's efforts, and if they
Yeah.
cannot accomplish it, then it's not like a hard limit.
yeah,
I'm a little curious because with AP classes, my understanding was that those were always larger classes because the kids sort of help teach themselves, right? And how
I'm
does
not sure
that
that's true other than possibly in science. I could be
math?
wrong.
But and again, maybe it's just going back when my kids were.
Mm.
were
Math
but I
could
was
be true also. Math could be true also, yeah.
I'm just curious how that interplays with this, because that could be like 3 classes. Well, not 3, but
Well, and one other thing that some districts have, which we don't have, is that they have, which I didn't include because it was somewhat orthogonal to the question of teaching load, is they limit the number of preps. So for example, if you're teaching 2 classes of AP Spanish, that counts as 1 prep, right? So other districts like Cambridge say, well, teachers cannot have more than something like 2 preps per, I can't remember exactly how they set it up, like no more than 2 preps per semester or something like that. And so there's other overlays on top of this limiting their overall workload that we don't necessarily have. Which ties to I guess my point in bringing this up was it ties to this AP question, because if you are teaching AP courses, but you're teaching multiple AP courses, as opposed to teaching an AP course, an honors course, a something else course, the number of preps also has to do with overall workload.
okay.
okay, so what do we do with this information?
We digest it.
Fair.
If you treat it as a parallel to the information that we saw earlier tonight, you could say, well, is there something here for us to pursue for some sort of economy of scale? And that's for you all to decide as to whether or not you think there's something here to pursue at some sort of economy of scale.
Yeah. I mean, it would be interesting to understand what 4+1 actually looks like from a number of students for teachers, right? So it's sort of translating, because people talk about 4+1, it's kind of a stated norm versus, as you said, Mariah, it's not contractually obligated. The contractually obligated is 115. I'm just curious how those map typically for the typical teacher for teachers at BHS. I don't have a good understanding of class sizes. We did see some numbers from you on sort of average class sizes, which is, going to be different from the distribution.
I think I gave you the largest sizes too. I just didn't give you the small sizes.
I see. Yeah. So I think I think that would be kind of, from my perspective, a useful view of what does this pragmatically look like for teachers at BHS. If you're implementing 4+1, where are they with respect to that 115?
I would just say, based on my experience after I retired and volunteered in a school teaching a class, I would think that having 5 classes is more difficult than having 4 classes plus 1 tutorial or 1 study hall that you're monitoring or something of that sort. So I'm not sure that a 4+1 is equivalent to a 5. But that's a function of, I think, the number of students and prep time for those classes to do it well. I think it is harder to teach 5 than it is to teach 4, in my view. So, but you know, that's for another day, I
definitely
guess.
it's definitely more work at a minimum, even if it's another section of the same class, right? The prep time might look different, but you know, you're
Yeah.
grading and other stuff. I mean, there's inevitably like that's a lot of work that teachers put in after hours.
Yeah, and you're also it's prep time, it's grading time, which just looking at this, it was interesting that a couple of school districts distinguish between English classes and other classes, and had a reduced number of students for English classes. I think there were 2 at the beginning that I saw as you were just scanning through that, which is probably not a function of prep time, but a function of
Grading.
paper grading time.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so my primary question is just the one that I mentioned, like what does this actually look like for VHS students in terms of 4+1 mapping to the number of students? Like where do we land in that since the metrics are different?
Is this a question you're asking me to get an answer to?
Yeah, I mean, if we, to the extent that we can. If we're going to do anything, I think with this information, I think that's the core question.
Like student experience of being in a 4+1 versus a 5 model?
No, I just, we've talked about 4+1 as something that is utilized as policy, but the contractual obligation is against the 115 number, and other schools seem to have kind of a, you know, one way of measuring it. And so it's not clear to me whether for, you know, for teachers, 4+1 ends up being 100 students or 125 students. Or not. In other words, if we're going to
Are those classes of 32 students, or are those classes of?
right.
So you're basically asking, what are the number of students that each high school teacher is teaching under a 4+1 system in the 4 classes?
Yeah.
Are you asking to exclude the +1? So for example, if a teacher is leading an advisory section or a tutorial section and providing support to the students in the tutorial, and there's 20 students in the classroom, are you saying you want those to be excluded from that calculation, or you're asking how the high school does it?
I'm asking how the high school does it. I don't want to exclude them if they're not excluded from the 115.
Okay, I can ask.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions on this?
Okay.
Okay.
Are we done?
Yes, I wanted to talk about what's coming up for the next couple weeks, but go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Mariah, this is to respond to your email. I had drafted a number of questions that sought to get the data behind the town and school forecasts for expenditures going forward, on the town side through 31, on the school side through fiscal year 29, and then also with respect to benefits. And I had done a draft of those, which I sent to Chaz, to Bella Wong, and to Melissa Goff, asking them to take a look at it prior to my going public with it. to see if there was anything that was unclear, anything that required further specification or clarification. And Bella forwarded that to Mariah. Mariah said, wait a minute, I thought questions were going to come through me. The intention is not to have questions go to the schools, but rather to give the schools an opportunity to say, look, this doesn't make any sense, or this does. This isn't information that we have. The same for the town. So that I just wanted to respond, Mariah, to you. I've already responded by email, but basically to let you all know that that is coming down the road. And
it's a huge data request that you have dropped.
Well, it's really
January 12th.
not. I mean, what
It really is,
asked,
Dick. Remember,
well,
we are down multiple staff, and staff on medical leave, staff at like absent positions, and like I don't want to read it, but it's a significant data request.
Okay, well, I mean, if the schools can't do it, they can't do it, but it basically says, where did these numbers come from? And it, with respect to the schools, it actually just addresses two categories: the wages and the transportation costs. And I didn't even touch on the others, but the two costs that are forecasted to increase substantially between fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 29. I targeted those, and basically the questions say, where do these numbers come from? Where does this multi-million-dollar increase come from? What's the data behind it? So, we can go from there. I mean, this is not the place to have the discussion without people having the questions in front of them. But in my view, we simply cannot responsibly say, okay, the town has asked for X millions of dollars and the schools have asked for Y millions of dollars. So we assume that that's what they need and we'll give it to them. That's not, in my view, the role of this committee.
So I didn't have a chance to read that email thoroughly. I was busy for a lot of the day, but I'd like to take a look at it and then maybe we can agree on what we do next. Go ahead. Right.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to, it was not intended as an agenda item for today. It was not intended to be put out publicly. It was not intended to be distributed as something that was to be responded to. It was simply, do these questions make sense? Do they need further clarification? And that was the question that I put to the town and the school operating personnel.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I wanted to talk about the next few weeks. So I'm just going to share my screen. All right. Can people see my screen? All right. So we have, so this was this week. So what was planned for next week, I was originally going to do the out of district revenue opportunity, but this is something that Dr. Schmuckler is working on. There's some additional, work that's happening from a price settings or cost setting perspective that's happening. I think, Mariah, correct me if I'm wrong, this was going to go to the finance subcommittee as well imminently. And I don't think, given all the legwork that Dr. Schmuckler is doing around this, I don't think it makes sense for me to do an independent analysis on this at this juncture. What I would prefer to do is let her do her analysis. And then my assumption is that we will see it on the 26th when we see the next rev of the budget, and then we can ask questions about it then. But Dr. Schmuckler did answer some of the questions that I had posed to her, a lot of the critical additional information that I would need is around the price setting and sort of capacity questions that I think we can ask Dr. Schmuckler or Bella or Superintendent Wong or somebody else directly once we see the analysis. So that's my proposal, that we not do an independent analysis on this topic, since the PSB team is going so deep on this. But I'd like to wait to see what they have and then dig in as appropriate. Does that make sense to the group? Any concerns with that? I'm gonna postpone this for the time being.
It's fine.
Okay. So Jeff, I have you down as following up on BEEP for next week.
Yep.
So- okay, great. CLA response. I know that this was discussed last week.
If you could just back up, you could
Sure.
opt the question, put the word questions in there. Hopefully I assume that I will get a response from just this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, from PSB and from the town, and we can discuss those questions.
Okay.
Are you going to circulate the questions to the group?
I did not want to circulate them to the group until I had given PSB and the town the opportunity to look at them to see whether they made sense. I didn't think that it was fair.
And I don't think it's fair, frankly, to ask questions like on behalf of the committee that the committee hasn't seen or agreed to.
I know,
discuss it.
and I wasn't
You did.
asking.
You sent them and said you were like asking these questions, right? And
Well,
so
I would characterize it as, because he didn't give them to us, maybe he was presenting them because he was going to ask them, he was going to show them to us, and he didn't want to make
I mean,
a request.
I will make clear to them that the sole, and I thought that my email had, but I will make clear to them that the sole purpose was to get their feedback as to whether the questions needed clarification or were asking for data that they didn't have. And then we can go from there as to posing them. I was not posing them individually.
Okay.
I don't think that was made clear in the email. Because, for example, it says something like, I've not shared these with ENRSC, but that implies the full committee, not your subcommittee. So it's not clear that they were being sent individually.
I will clarify. I'll send out an email this evening clarifying that.
Okay. I had time slated for additional topics and overflow time on the 20th, to the extent that anything else comes up. I think alternatively, we can have another conversation around recommendations, which I think was started last week. So what I'd like to do is actually start drafting an outline that will be a working copy that then we can review on the 26th. I want to start thinking about what the recommendations are, take the conversation that happened last week, some of the discussion that we had today, and start thinking about how this might come together into a broader report. Does anybody have concerns about that? There's still obviously open questions. We'll review the budget on the 26th. I assume we're still on for that meeting, Mariah, and that Superintendent Wong will be able to attend. We discussed that on the 19th of December, but wanted to validate that because that's kind of a next step as well.
Remind me what's happening. This is questions we had on what?
So this was the next level of detail in the budget. When we had the conversation on December 19th,
Yeah.
Superintendent Wong had said that they would have a next round
The thumbnail, right? But that's essentially cleaned up of what you've already seen. It would be like the next iteration of those numbers. It won't be the next level down. It will be the next iteration of the equivalent.
Okay, that sounds fine. Got it. Well, do we expect the out of district information?
That should be presented to school committee this Wednesday.
Okay.
So, yes. Or to finance subcommittee.
The full analysis or just the pricing information? I thought it was the pricing information that was going.
I don't know that we'll ever get a full analysis of how they've calculated it. Historically, we've never asked them to give us like we approve, I'll give you an example, food services fees. We don't ask them to give us an entire analysis of how they arrive at $3 for breakfast.
No, I don't mean like a full analysis of how they came up with the price. Just an analysis of how I wanted to just take a step back. The reason I was recommending that we remove an independent analysis on this subcommittee's part for the out of district revenue opportunities because Dr. Schmuckler is doing her analysis on how big she thinks this is. Part of it will be the price, part of it will be, so the staffing, the number of slots, etc. And I just want to make sure that we have an opportunity to ask questions about that view and the inputs into that. How many students are used
On the 26th, you mean?
Yes, that's right.
Maybe, I just don't know if your Bella will be able to answer all your questions if Karen and Susan did the analysis together. I don't know that they'll be here that night. So we'd have to find, why don't we see what lands on Wednesday and then see what, if you feel like there's still information you would want to know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So maybe. All right, so we need more information on that. All right, and then we'll still target reviewing the outline on the 26th. But I do think that we can start, talking about recommendations. Next week. Okay. On February 2nd, zero-based budgeting, and Mariah, this was yours. Is that reasonable? We're still on track for that? Mariah?
Probably not on the 2nd, because again, I haven't seen, it will depend when we get the actual budget book, like to be able to say plug in any of the numbers. I could show probably the first version of the model. At least to give you the sense of the staffing portion of it, I think.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Yeah.
Mariah, what is, in your mind, zero-based budgeting?
It's starting at 0 and rebuilding the budget up based on what you actually think you need.
When you say starting at 0, assuming nothing at all.
Yeah. Instead of
Okay.
taking last year and adding 10%.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
We did this a couple years ago to sort of validate the numbers from a different approach.
No, that was my understanding of what zero-based budgeting was, and
Okay. I do think it's important to share the model at that meeting because we do need to start moving on to finalizing recommendations and writing the actual report. So then the rest of the schedule is recommendation synthesis and discussion. I think to the extent that we can start writing portions of this, I mean, people have done a good job of actually writing up their own sections already. So I think, hopefully that'll won't be too difficult to start bringing those things together. I have a document draft review for the 16th of February. This is PSB vacation week. I'm not going to be available during that week. So, we can either move it to later in the week if people are available for that meeting to do this. But we'll need somebody else to chair that meeting.
Real quick, sorry, I have to go pick up my daughter, so I got to drop. But
all right, that sounds good.
thank you.
All
See
right,
everybody.
thank you. All right, well, that was it. So I'm still targeting end of February for the document.
Sadaf, is this document? I didn't notice this document in the meeting.
No, this was just This was, I just revised this based on the conversation that we had, and I'll email this out. And
Thank you.
we can
That's
put
all.
it in
Thank
the
you.
notes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I sent the last version out 2 meetings ago. But
Right. Okay. Thank you.
yeah. Okay. All right.
Great.
Okay, good. So actually, sorry, going back to the CLA response, based on the discussion last week, is it worthwhile for me to document the work that's been done, or should we wait to come to a conclusion on a third-party audit? I mean, I can certainly document what we hear from PSB. The group can ask questions. But I do think that the third-party audit would likely be more compelling to the voting public. So I want to hear from the group on this.
My sense is that, and I may be wrong, but you may not have a third-party audit finished prior to the May elections.
Right. That's right.
So that almost makes it incumbent on us, if we are going to talk about this and address this, to do it ourselves.
I don't see how this group is in a position to do any sort of review of what the schools have done and opine on it.
Okay.
So this is exactly what I'm struggling with, which is,
I mean, you know, we would
question.
have to take the schools.
Right. So I would be summarizing what the schools are telling me, which is then, I think, it's just, it's a summary of what I've heard from the schools.
Okay.
I wouldn't even touch it then. Let me say it differently. I don't know what the full committee would do, but as a voting member of the subcommittee, I would not vote in favor of that sort of a step, because that to me is validating what we're being told by the people who were under investigation. And I just think that that is the wrong approach for the voters of this town to accept. And I think it's going to be really hard for the schools to, well, I'm not going to say anymore.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm inclined to see where, I know that Chaz and Bella were going to talk about a potential independent audit. Let's see where that conversation lands. And then, we can discuss the CLA response more holistically as a follow-up. But Cliff, I tend to agree with you that I'm questioning the value of me doing a sort of a summary of what's been done. And I think that I think that might put this committee in a bit of a bit of a weird situation. To sort of be playing that role. So this is where my head is as well right now. Okay.
I just want to remind everyone that it wasn't an audit and no one was under investigation.
Right.
Just putting it out there, verbalizing
the use
it
of
for
the
the
use of the term
record.
audits. The use of the term audit is incorrect. We should all get away from doing that. Regardless, it's still a situation where a review of policies and procedures and whatever it was took place. The school committee has and staff have taken steps, and they say that it addresses the issues raised. They say it addresses the issues raised in the CLA review. And what the community is being asked to do is to accept that at face value without it being verified by the organization that raised the issues, or that evaluated the issues. They didn't raise them. And I just think it is um, to me, it's a very circular situation. It's to me, it becomes self-dealing in a sense. And I personally just would not give my opinion, my vote to say that I acknowledge that appropriate changes were done in accordance with what CLA discovered. I just think we had this discussion last week. I think it's better for the community and better for the public schools of Brookline to have that work or those changes be endorsed by the people who did the review.
Understood. I was just making sure we were all using the right terminology. And as
Fair enough.
Sadaf said, it was, I think, between Chaz and Bella to discuss.
Yeah, so I know that they have that next step, and I do think that there is benefit to, you know, I look at this work and I think about, you know, what is really going to resonate with the voting public, and with an eye towards that, and I'm not sure me doing a summary for the report is going to be what is most compelling.
And
So that's, yeah, go
and
ahead.
I will defer. You know, if the limit would be listening or hearing and reporting what the schools are reporting to you, then I agree with Cliff. So
Yeah, because that's, I think that's where it would.
I mean, if that's the functional limit of what we could do realistically.
Okay. All right. So we'll put a pin in that until next week, or, you know, until we hear. But I have it on the list for us to at least chat about next week. So it's on
Okay.
the agenda. Okay, good. All
Great.
right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
All right, bye.